Calamari, salutations everyone! Squid here, bringing you another episode of the Clean Sweep show, the show about the YCL where the host is running out of ideas to put in this opening sentence, so please help me. But I still haven't run out of memes, so here it is, the intro of the video. By the way, don't forget to leave a like on it if you like the content that I'm making. Leave a subscribe at the bottom because that is really appreciated. And without further ado, let's go on to the match reviews from last week. So week 4 of the YCL. First match that we're gonna review is a very professional match between the Philadelphia Melmetals and the Rustboro City Rejects. So it was a really close 1-0 victory for the Rejects, and the match started with the Toxic Spite setup for Arts, and they were amazing in chipping down the first line of defense of the Philadelphia Melmetals, especially that Drudigon. So that Drudigon got poisoned, not badly poisoned, and with the Sand chip from the Jigglyth, it basically stood out much less on the field than it should have. And that is quite good prep on Arts' side, because that Drudigon could have been really bulky and pretty bad for Arts for it to sit on the field. Also, another big important factor in this match's outcome is actually the rapid spin mind games, because Arts had a ghost type on his side of the field, and on the Philadelphia side was a Claydol, and the Claydol wanted to rapid spin away the hazards, but with the ghost type from Arts, he could have spin blocked, so the Claydol, the first time it sit on the field, just teleported out. I would have personally tried to outright rapid spin at that point, but to see if Arts really did make the switch, but it didn't happen. But the second time that the Philadelphia Melmetals switched in the Claydol, it couldn't rapid spin because Arts switched it out into the Cofagrigus, and the hazards were basically there for a little while longer. They were rapid spun away a pretty while later in the match, but it didn't matter at that point because Arts had already gained what he wanted. Some pretty cool tech from the Philadelphia Melmetals later down the line with the curse set on the Ferrothorn. It was a good idea in theory. Thing is, Arts really had a counter for that present at the other side of the field, which was the Iron Defense of the Gigalith. Something to consider in future matches. If you want to set up a curse on the Ferrothorn, make sure that the enemy doesn't have an Iron Defensor on his side of the field. Maybe it will do much more work that way. And then we have the heat of the battle, the moment where the Meteor Beam Dracozolt was activated, and it managed to kill outright the Charger Bug. But in the next turn, we actually see why Meteor Beam Dracozolt is not actually used, because it failed to KO the Clefable, although Clefable is pretty bulky on the special side, but nonetheless, Clefable KO'd the Dracozolt back, and the match was only really decided at the last turn, because there was a Victini on the side of the field for Cherry, and an Urshifu on the other side of the field for Arts. And the reason why Arts won is actually because the Cherry didn't have Psychic on his Victini. So if he had Psychic with his spread and the Expert Belt, it was definitely a KO on the amount of HP that Arts had. So I don't know if he was invested in special defense also, but I don't think so. I think he was max HP, max attack. And yeah, because Cherry didn't have the Psychic, he ended up not KOing the Urshifu, and that meant the Urshifu won the match for Arts. So really close match, could have gone either way. Ultimately ended up just because of a bad decision in prep. That's basically it. Next up, we have the 6th Streets Viper versus the Austin Taurus, and Sally won 4-0 against Sharky. The match started out quite slow with the Zapdos being quite bulky and hard for the Tauruses to break through, but the game really blew wide open when Sally made a great play and he clicked Rising Voltage with the Rotom in front of the Palossand, and the Escavalier switched in, and it took way too much damage and just had to be sacked next turn. And by the way, that Rotom set applied so much pressure on Sharky's team, and it was perfect for the match because later down the line it used Leaf Storm on the Palossand. By the way, the Palossand should have stayed in the first turn because it had Rindoberry, and the thing is, with the ship from the rocks, it actually put him in range for always being KO'd by the Leaf Storm. That's why Sharky should have stayed in with the Palossand on the first turn and tried to hit the Rotom with something like Shadow Ball, whatever the Palossand had. I don't know. And Rotom then managed to burn the Will-O-Wisp, and the Will-O-Wisp was important to stop the Tyrantrum from outright becoming a threat. I didn't appreciate a play that Sally did because he clicked Future Sight on the Tyrantrum when he could have clicked Psychic. And I think it's generally better to just outright damage the mon that is setting up than actually be quite passive with the and just allow it to set up further with the Bronzong in this case. I would have clicked Psychic outright, but the play still proved good because Sally managed to KO it with the damage from the Future Sight and then the burn. So I don't know to what extent I can criticize that play, but it's still something that I would have done different than Sally. That's why he's the champion and I'm not, right? So the match continued, and the Zapdos really proved hard to break through. The Cocos sat in front of it, the Dragonite sat in front of it, and they both struggled quite handily against the Zapdos, and the Austin Taurus only managed to break through it when the Zapdos finally ran out of Hurricanes. At that point, he had already confused both the Rotom and the Dragonite, but then the Dragonite didn't get KO'd, and with the extreme speed and some Dragon Dances setup, he could finally clean up the match. One thing that Sharky could have done differently at that point was probably go into Meowstic sooner rather than later and just hit Reflect, but I'm not sure if he had Reflect or anything, so I don't know to what extent he could have made that play. Next up, we have the Cold Summer Assassins and the 3 Electrons winning 2-0, and this is the match where that Pikachu just really stole our hearts because that Pikachu was so amazing. I'd never seen a Pikachu applying so much pressure in a Draft League match. It was insane. It was really good to see. It was beautiful. So the Cramorant was always a pivoting tool for the 3 Electrons and Sven. He began the match by setting up the Toxic Spikes, one layer, and then he set up the second layer later. And whenever the Cramorant was in, he basically was U-turning out into the Pikachu. And that meant that the Pikachu just got a free attack on something, and nothing on the Cold Summer Assassins team really wanted to take an attack from Pikachu. Even the CGY was at risk of being knocked off, so not really an option there. And there was a play where the Cramorant just sat in front of the Pikachu only to defog. And the thing is, Pikachu was such an immense threat that he should have attacked the Pikachu. Pikachu is really frail, And later down the match, he would have died from the recoil from the Volt Tackle, and that meant that the Pikachu wouldn't be as much of a threat and wouldn't play as big of a role as it did, because he applied offensive pressure with the Pikachu early game, he applied it mid game, he applied it late game, and there was just nothing that the Cold Summer Assassins really could do. The fake out into extreme speed combination was really deadly, and meant that basically Mons were dead from 50% HP because they really couldn't attack with priority. And yeah, that's basically the story of the match. Pikachu, Pikachu, Pikachu. Yeah. Next up, we have the Trashton Thieves winning 5-0 against the Miami Hitmar. And this was a really cool match because Bishmi really played out of his mind this match. He predicted the Garchomp really beautifully with the Ice Beam on the Lantern, and the Garchomp was outright KO'd by the Ice Beam, and Aldro was on the back foot from the early game, and then Bishmi decided to set up with Zen Mode Darmanitan. Really cool to see. Belly Drum, Ice Punch, Earthquake, and I don't remember the... Sub. And he predicted the switch from Aldra to set up the Sub into the Rosalia, the switch was. And later he pressed the Belly Drum, and then with the Salak Berry, that meant that he almost outspeed all of the remaining Mons on Aldra's team, except one, which was the Zarude. And when Aldra recognized that, he should have immediately come with the Zarude out and just revenge the Darmanitan, because the Darmanitan managed to KO 2 Mons before the Zarude stepped in. And then the Zarude decided to click U-turn, and that meant that Aldra just had to sack another Mon when he could have clicked, probably even Power Whip clicked, KO'd at that point, even Darkest Lariat, which was the move that he used to KO the Darmanitan, would have KO'd at that point because Darmanitan is really frail. So it was quite a questionable play by Aldra there, but I don't fault him because people would have been tilted by the Zen Mode Darmanitan setting up. So yeah, so really good match for Bishmi. He then cleaned up the late game with his remainder team, and he managed to preserve the differential he already had with some pretty good switch-ins. So props on Bishmi. It was a really convincing win, and it didn't even look like Aldra was close from winning this one. Next up, we have the Cerulean City Mewtwo versus the Endor Teddiursus, and the Cerulean City Mewtwo won this match 2-0. They basically began the match with the Arcanine being special defense and walling pretty much the Endor Teddiursus team. Setting up with the Lucario the first turn it came in on the field wasn't the best idea in my opinion, because you really don't know if the enemy still has an answer for Lucario, and Lucario is a pretty frail mon. So what I would have done is actually the first time click Aura Sphere to see what was the switch in to the Lucario, and then when eventually that switch in was out, maybe try to set up. Lucario is a really free mon, and it will basically die from anything. I know that from personal experience. So you have to really be careful when using it and when to set up with it, because at the slightest mistake, it will die, basically. So the match continued. There was a point where the Arcanine was sitting in front of the Type Null, and the Type Null decided to hit the Hail button. The Hail button was puzzling to me at first, but then I figured out that maybe Fuego didn't want to miss Blizzards, that's why he ran the Hail. But the Hail ended up working out really nicely because it cut the healing from the Arcanine. So that was also a really good bring on Fuego. He has been somewhat creative with these sets. And another thing he really did great was bringing the Excelgar with the specs. The Excelgar with specs really did the number on Luke Harry's team. But there was a point where it was a little bit misplayed, because there was a time where the Dracovish was sitting on the field and it had like 60 to 65% HP. And Fuego switched in the Rotom to hit the Blizzard, but the Blizzard, I calced it and it would have never KO'd from that range. And the Excelgar had a chance to KO the Dracovish with the Bug Buzz, so I think the better play there would have been to just go into Excelgar, pray that the Bug Buzz actually killed the Dracovish, and from that point, Luke Harry couldn't have set up with the Mew, because it would have taken a super effective Bug Buzz, Specs Bug Buzz to the face. So Luke Harry would have been in a really bad position there. But the thing is, he found himself with the Mew sitting in front of the Latios, and the Latios only had psychic moves. That was a questionable decision on the Endor Teddiursa's preparation part. And the Mew just set up enough cosmic powers that it could just start power and body press the enemy to win. So props to the Cerulean City Mewtwo for winning this one. Props to the Endor Teddiursas for bringing really cool tech that caught his opponent off guard. Unfortunately, at the end of the match, or rather at the beginning of this week, Fuego did drop out of the league. We wish him all the best. And since he's a young kid still, school is important. Don't forget to study. Do great things in the future. So next up we have the Brisbane Rillaboomers back on the winning board with a 3-0 victory against the Calexico Blazikens. And the match actually started in Sen's favor, because he led with the Octillery, and the Octillery was a really fun bring. I liked to see it very much, didn't expect it to put so much work, but it applied a lot of offensive pressure for the for the Calexico Blazikens actually, and basically managed to get a KO with the Carkol, because the Brisbane Rillaboomers were in such a bad position that they had to sack Amon to deal with the Octillery. Double Protect actually worked out really nicely, because it managed to scout what the Octillery wanted to do at that point of the battle. So props to Justin for doing that. And then the Aromatisse came in, and Sen really struggled against that Aromatisse. It was max defense, and that meant that basically the things that on Sen's side that wanted to hit it had a really tough time doing it. Sen managed the first time with Zero Aura on the field, and he decided to knock off, and the item on the Aromatisse was the Rocky Helmet. I would have Plasma Fisted there, because the Aromatisse is such a pain to break through that you want as much damage as possible on it. So Plasma Fists would have been the play, even if the Justin switched it out into the Zygarde. You had the Piloswine and the Serena switching, so it could have been contained somewhat. And then Justin did a play where he pressed the Scale Shot on the Zygarde later down the match, and I don't agree with that play, because Sen had already showed that he switching to the Zygarde was the Piloswine. So against the Piloswine, you actually preferred to hit the 1000 arrows than the Scale Shot. I know you were thinking that Serena would have switched it in, but since Sen already showed that the Piloswine was switching in the first time, you could have counted on that happening the second time also. Later down the line, the Zapdos began selecting up Bulk Ups after some pivoting. The Aromatisse came in to try and wall it, and then the Zapdos pressed the Brave Bird when it was at +2, and Justin was in full HP with full HP on the Aromatisse, And I gotta say that crit definitely matter, because Jolly Zapdos never KO'd from full. So even with 2 bulk ups, the only way that the Zapdos would have KO'd the Aromatisse was with the crit. So that crit definitely mattered. Not on the long run, because Sen could have easily brought something in that could have KO'd Aromatisse from that range. But the thing is, when the Zapdos went down, nothing on Sen's team resisted the close combat from the Mienshao, and basically his mons were already chipped, and Scarf Mienshao just went in, and there was nothing Sen could have done. So props to Justin for winning this one. Yeah, great win for you, Justin. Hopefully this helps you bring some confidence back and start to have more confidence in yourself and make the correct plays that you need to win. Next up, we have what was the match of the week. The Hellblaze Volcanos lost 0-4 against Monte, and Lucas is now no longer undefeated. And the first thing that I noticed when I started seeing the match was actually that Lucas didn't bring Diente, and Diente would have been amazing in this matchup because of 2 reasons. First, all of Lucas' removal is weak to fire attacks, so you need something to resist the fire attacks. And besides that, there were 2 fire resists on Lucas' team, I think. Yeah, which were the Dragapult and the Quagsire. But the thing is, Fluffy Double, Galvantula, and Skarmory really are weak to fire attacks, and Alcremie doesn't break through fire type Pokemon, so gotta say that I was really surprised the Entei didn't come because of that, and also because it applied a lot of offensive pressure on Monte's team. Nonetheless, Alcremie set was the first thing that flagged me on this match, because it could have worked. But the thing is, since Flareon wasn't physical, Lucas set up the defense that he didn't want first. So that's why the Alcremie didn't end up working. That and the overheat damage to finish it off at the end. So double fire moves was a really good bring on the Immunity Idol side. Next up, the Volcanos tried some pivoting with the Galvantula. I liked it, but the fire move could have been expected when the Skarmory switched in, because Galvantula was weak to fire, as was the Skarmory. So I would have rather seen a Quagsire switching, because then with the Quagsire switching, if you fear the Grass Pledge, which from the commentary I think that you were expecting the Grass Pledge, you could have then switched it out into the Dragapult, predicting that Grass Pledge. So after Toxicking the Dragapult, switching the first turn on Monte was really good to rack up the toxic damage, but another switch I think would have been preferable, and Monte also mentioned it on his video, to rack up a little bit more of toxic damage on it. And the thing is, Lucas did really take advantage from that point, because the Dragapult on the field could basically hit what was in front of it, and that was really well played. Another thing that I wasn't a fan of was the Fluffy Double, because it didn't make sense to me that you wanted to make your team even weaker to fire attacks. Steadfast or even Bulletproof would have been really good on this match, to not be weak to that Flareon, because at that point you really didn't want to stay in with the Flareon on the field, because it outright outcode you with the overheat. And speaking of overheat, later down the line, the Flareon should have clicked overheat instead of Lava Plume, because at that point of the battle, nothing really wanted to take an overheat to the face. The Dragapult was pretty bad in HP, The Quagsire was basically the only thing that wanted to take an overheat to the face, but even that, you had pretty good switch-ins to it, with Mandibuzz trying to Toxic it. And the other thing that I wanted to mention was the last time that it was in front of the Spectrier, when the Spectrier basically only had like 10 HP. You could have clicked the Cotton Guard instead of the Payback, because Spectrier would have attacked first and would have died from the recoil. In the end, it didn't end up mattering because of the way the match occurred, but it's still something that you could consider in the future. And the match effectively was won by Monte when he clicked the Grass Pledge to KO the Quagsire. From that point onwards, Lucas basically didn't have enough gas in the tank to still win the match. And the last match of the week actually hasn't occurred yet. It's the Sydney 6 taking on the Nashville Nidokings. As of me recording, this match is still to be battled, so looking forward to it. That said, we now have concluded the match recaps from last week. Awards are to be attributed, and once again, Coach of the Week goes to Monte because he managed to beat the remaining undefeated team on his division. So props to Monte. He also managed to do it with a 4-0 comfortable victory. Comfortable in the score, not in the way that it played out, because it was quite close until the end. But yeah, this is the match that Monte used to beat Lucas. I really liked the Flareon. It being special really caught Lucas off guard. And props to him. He's now sitting at first on the table. We'll see the results and the standings right after this section. MVP of the week, I gotta give it to the Pikachu. There was no other option because that Pikachu was so amazing. It KO'd, I believe, 4 mons of the opponent, and it was not only the mons that it KO'd, it was the amount of total damage that it did to the enemy team, and the fact that it was used basically from the beginning of the match to then clean it up at the end. So props to Sven for utilizing the Pikachu so well. It was really fun to see, and props to Pikachu. So, as the weekly MCcargo, the hit of the week, I gotta give it to the Dracozolt because that Power Herb special Dracozolt was really cool to see. It managed to KO the Charjabug, but then it proved to us why we usually see physical Dracozolt, because the Clefairy came in and it was capable of tanking the Thunderbolt really handily, even at +1. So yeah, that's basically modest Dracozolt for you. Yeah, special Dracozolt for you, I mean. Now looking at the standings, basically all things are the same in the Armor division. Austin Taurus are still sitting at number 1. Trashton Thieves are still sitting at number 2. And the Electrons are starting to move up the standings. And really surprised to see that Aldrey is sitting at 1 and 3 at this point of the season. So really looking for him to bounce back at the end of the season. And from the Crown division, it's basically all the same. And the only change that occurred was the immunity idols going for the first spot, while the Hellblaze Volcanos dropped to number 3. That said, that race at the top of the Crown division is still very much open to discussions, so we'll see how that one goes. By the way, this is now the opportunity for me to say welcome to the Sacramento Sandslash and Pac-Mac to the league. He's the substitute coach for the under Teddy Ursas, and I'm looking forward to see what he does with his new team. And now we'll enter the part of the pick'ems of the video, and this is how the pick'ems went for last week. basically me, Arts, and Bishmi decided that we should have got the same scores, so that's basically what happened. We are 5-1. Sventun is 3-3, possibly 4-3, possibly 3-4. We'll see. And Sen is 4-2, so he will stay positive for this week at least. And from the percentage of picks correctly among the weeks, basically all tied at the top of the standings for the people that hit all of the weeks until now. And Southside Braves and CINE actually still have a higher percentage, but they haven't participated in as many weeks. So looking forward to see how the pick'ems will go from this point onwards, because the race is pretty much on to eventually get that best analyst trophy. There's not, it's a mind you, it's a figurative trophy. Okay, there's actually not a trophy, a physical one. Okay, so let's start the pick'ems, and the first match that we're gonna see is actually the match of the week for this week. It's a banger. It's the Austin Taurus against the 3 Electrons, and I'll be good to my word and say that unless the champion loses, I won't count him out. I won't bet against him. And the thing is, if there's a coach that can, at this point on this division, break the Austin Taurus, I think it's Sven, because Sven has been quietly moving up the standings, improving his performance. He's had a really convincing performance 2 weeks in a row now, and I want to see how this match up goes. So talking a little bit more in depth about the matchup, I see Bronzong as a really good answer against the Landorus Incarnate and the Como to a certain extent. And I think this is the first match where I feel like the Austin Taurus could bring the Kadabra, and it will be a really good bring. Also, electric terrain is not ideal for the Taurus because of the 2 ground types that are present on Sven's team. 2 ground types? Yeah, 2 ground types. And Cinderace, on the side of the Electrons, I think Cinderace is kind of looking hot, because the best check to the Cinderace, I think it's the Poliwrath. Tentacruel could be, but Tentacruel has a pretty low defense stat, so it's not an ideal. Poltergeist from Dhelmise I think are also free, because the ghost resist from the Taurus is basically none. It's Lickitung, and I don't feel like he brings Lickitung to this match because of the Dhelmise. And Como is faster than the Dragonite, so maybe a setup Kobo for this match will actually be the brink. I don't know. It's an interesting option to explore for Sven, because he has the speed advantage with the setup. So, like I said, I'll still go with the Taurus, but I wouldn't be surprised if Sven actually won this match. Next up, we have the Miami Hitmar facing off the Cold Summer Assassins, and the only real check to Garchomp is probably Salamence to a certain degree, but if Souza doesn't bring the Swirlix to the match, Outrages from the Garchomp are basically free. Oh, and the Ribombee. No, so the Ribombee could stop the Outrages, but it's so frail that it really doesn't want to switch in on the Garchomp. Another thing is that the Primarina can act as a pretty good check to the Urshifu, and it only has to watch out for a potential Poison Jab. But if that Primarina goes down, I don't see nothing switching in on that Urshifu. Probably Surfetched if it's locked into Wicked Blow, but I still wouldn't count on it. Sticky Web from the Ribombee is also looking really good for Souza. And if this was basically purely based on matchup, I would give it to Souza. But since I'm quite familiar with the level of play from both players, I feel comfortable enough to still pick Aldra on this one. He's still an amazing player. He had bad luck for 2 of his matches, so I think he's still a good enough of a player that he can outplay this matchup disadvantage. Next up, we have a match that has already occurred. I haven't seen it, although I know the result, but I decided to go with Bishmi because he's the greatest battler ever, and that's basically it, right? No, the other thing about Bishmi is that he's still undefeated at this point of the season, and that's pretty impressive. So the Rhyperior can be a pretty good check to the Dracozolt. Otherwise, the Dracozolt could go nuts, and it also appreciates the sand that the Gigalith sets up, or rather doesn't mind the sand. But the thing is, I look at the Trashton Thieves, and I look at that Darmanitan, and I look at resists for the Darmanitan, and the best resist is probably Magmortar, but if it switches in on an Earthquake, it's basically toast. So I don't really see switches to the Magmortar on the Rustboro City Reject side. So that's why I decided to pick Bishmi, because nothing will appreciate a hit from the Darmanitan. That said, I think that the Trashtown Thieves really have to bring the Sableye to this match. Otherwise, I see that Orbital running nuts and doing nasty things and setting up, and yeah, but maybe that's because I'm traumatized by Orbital. I don't know. But I feel like Orbital could be a really good bring this match. Next up, we have the 6th Street Viper versus the Philadelphia Melmetals. And when I see both teams, I see that Ferrothorn says, "Thank you for the rain. I'm here to stay." And if he brings a setup, and the Philadelphia Melmetals bring a setup set like they did last week, I really have a hard time seeing that Ferrothorn being broken through. That said, the Cherry really doesn't want to bring in the Victini on a rain team, but otherwise I think that Jolteon could hit the field for the first time, and I'm really hoping to see the Jolteon brought to this match. So I spoke about the Ferrothorn, and I think the best way to break through the Ferrothorn is actually Zapdos with Heatwave. I know he has a Talonflame, but Talonflame can be rather predictable and is also a pretty good switch into the Jellicent, so I don't know if it's the best option available. And Claydol is actually the best remover of the Philadelphia Melmetals team, and it has a really tough time coming to this match because of the presence of so many water type attacks on the Survivors team. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Survivors went for a route where they just stack rocks early game and then try to go from there. Thing is, 6th Street Survivor has impressed me more than Cherry at this point of the season. That said, I think the Melmetals still have shown they have what it takes to snag a win, and maybe it's this week, maybe it's not, I don't know. But I still decided to pick the 6th Street Viper. Next up, we have the Calexico Blazikens against the Immunity Idols. Sen versus Monte. It will be a really fun match. And on Monte's side, the only real check for the Zapdos is actually the Mandibus. But the thing is, the Zapdos can be revenge KO'd by many stuff on Monte's team, so I don't see it putting that much work on the match, but who knows. Spectrier can't really touch the Hydreigon, and whenever Spectrier comes in, I feel like Hydreigon has a free switching, and Sen can start applying pressure with it that way. And then Marowak is actually the only ground type on Monte's team. Does it want to come to this match? I don't know. If he doesn't bring the Marowak, I see that Zero are also running wild and potentially breaking that Mandibuzz. Um, Heracross, on the other hand, might be deterred by the Charizard, but if Sen is suddenly without either the Charizard, both the Charizard and the Zapdos, then that Heracross could start to go nuts on Sen's team. And I also really like the Cloyster this week. So I'm really expecting a Shell Smash Cloyster this week because it does a number on Sen's team. And ultimately the Cloyster is what made me go towards Monte. That and the difference in performance so far in this season. So I gotta give it to Monte on this one. Next up, we have the CINE 6 versus the Hellblaze Volcanos. And when I look at the matchup, I see that Shadow Ball spam is really free for Lucas if Kangaskhan doesn't come to the match. That said, from the CINE 6 and Siden's playstyle, I think he is the man to bring it to the match, just so that doesn't happen. And Tapu Lele isn't really resisted by Lucas on any point of his team, but he can be revenged by the Dragapult, so it will be an interesting dynamic there. Speaking of Dragapult, I think that the best switch into the Dragapult is the Hitran, especially with an Assault Vest. It could prove tough to break through. And I also really like Sneasel in this match. Scarfed set to revenge KO the Dragapult or potentially outspeed most of the Hellblaze Volcaronis team is a really good bring this week. But still, I have to give it to the Hellblaze Volcaronis because they were so dominating in the first 3 matches of the season that I expect him to still be able to dominate his opponent this week. Next up, we have a matchup that I will look live in the video because I hadn't had the time to look at the new teams. So it's the Sacramento Sandslash versus the Nashville Nidokings. So I'm looking at that Latios and I see pretty good answers in that Corporaja being assault vested. So that part of the preparation still applies. And that Nidoking might be tough to switch in for the Nashville Nidokings. Curiously. But at the same time, I really like the Landorus here. Maybe not so much anymore because the team has changed quite a bit. So I'm struggling to see an offensive presence by Braves that can really do a number on the Sandslash team. Maybe the Azumarill. Azumarill looks kind of nice. But it could be stopped by a defensive Blastoise somewhat. But yeah, otherwise, Azumarill, really good bring this week. And let me see. Oh, Rotom Frost. Rotom Frost has actually pretty insane coverage against Braves team. And I wouldn't be surprised if it came to the match. And I've heard that the Sacramento Sandslash player Pac-Mac is actually quite good. That said, I still go with my buddy Braves because I haven't seen Pac-Mac play. So if he convinces me enough this week, I'll start betting on him in the later weeks. And the last match that we're gonna preview this week or do the pick'ems for is the Brisbane Real Boomers versus the Cerulean City Mewtwo, another Aussie duel. And in this matchup, rocks will be essential for the Cerulean City Mewtwo to chip down that Araquanid that really wants to come in on the field and just click liquidation or something similar. Because the Araquanid will want to bring Water Absorb for this match because of the Dracovish. So another tool that the Cerulean City Mewtwo can utilize to prevent that Araquanid from being a problem is actually bringing electric or rock coverage on the Mew. and that should prove effective to deal with the Arachnid. That said, Mew can't switch in on it directly because it will fear a Leech Life. And another thing is the switch-ins to Zygarde, Thousand Arrows aren't really there. Whimsicott is quite frail, so that I don't know until what point it can be considered a switch-in. Another offensive option that Real Boomers have this week is actually the Rotom, because the Rotom hits pretty much a good amount of the enemy's team. Especially that Milotic, which can be a really tough wall to break through. An option that the Cerulean City Mewtwo can explore is actually burning the Arachnid with the Arcanine, because since it won't run the water bubble, it won't be able to prevent burns. So some option that could be explored there. And the last thing that I want to mention is actually the Mienshao. Mienshao can punch some holes on the enemy team, especially with that Miltank with Thick Fat being quite tanky. So that's also something that the Brisbane Real Boomers can potentially have up his sleeve. That said, I'll still favor Luke Harry. He has been a pretty consistent performer throughout the whole season, and he's a crafty man with his preparation, and I hope that he will bring something really cool with his preparation that will catch Justin off guard. So this basically concludes all of the video for this week. Thank you guys for watching. If you're still watching at this point, you're awesome. Don't forget to leave a like on the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you for the power rankings later down the week. So, Squid, jetting out.